Good afternoon, and welcome to Geography 2050, Powering Our Future Planet. Energy is the focus for the next 2 days, and we bring together thought leaders from government, from industry, and academia to consider what our energy futures might be. Bringing together people from diverse sectors to engage in productive dialogue about key issues is a hallmark of the AGS approach to education, leadership, and good policy. We understand geography is not a static memorization of place names, but a dynamic, engaging activity in which we understand a world that is constantly changing. One of our early and very dynamic directors, Dr. Isaiah Bowman, wrote about 70 years ago, and I quote, "To a revolutionary degree, man changes geography as he goes along. All geography is always new."
Do a little research and you will realize that in every place, energy is in the middle of the fray. Look into the future and try to imagine the global effects from our use of fossil fuels on sea level and the mass migration that will come from coastal cities when they flood. Why is this all true? Because energy is needed everywhere, all the time, forever. The world community is paying more attention to climate change than ever before. While others may dither and dawdle, obfuscate and deny, worry about what it might cost, and question whether or not we really must take climate change seriously, I catch a whiff of the catastrophe of climate change right over the horizon.
Many of us for years have been concerned that climate change was sort of like an offshore hurricane. You could predict it, you could see it coming, you could foresee its damage, but it hadn't yet made landfall. Well, turns out it's starting to make landfall in the form of some pretty dire predictions that I'd like to mention to you. The first has to do with the explosion or the collapse of the carbon asset bubble. These warnings are coming from Mark Carney, the governor of the Bank of England, and its insurance oversight chief. We are seeing very significant publications in journals like Nature and Nature Climate Change, peer-reviewed, making the very same warnings. How is it that this carbon bubble is a problem? Well, the fossil fuel industry has not done a very good job in recent years of telling the truth about much of anything, and it appears right now that they're actually fooling their shareholders and fooling themselves about the future of their reserves.
I'm going to be talking about the recent IPCC Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report on 1.5 degrees C. And one of the things that people forget when they focus on 1.5 is that's global. If you look over land or at different latitudes, warming has been much more than 1 degree C near the poles, over land, and at night. We also report very robust evidence that impacts are already being observed of global warming. For example, ecosystems are shifting, agricultural calendars are changing, and the chances of heat waves, droughts, fires, more intense storms and hurricanes are increasing.
We will get hit particularly hard, according to these reports. Regions, I'll quote, "regions with higher marginal costs experience a steep decline in production," for example, Russia, or lose almost their entire oil and gas industry, for example, Canada and the United States.
So today's discussion is really about how do we take time into account when we think about the future? How do we believe it's possible that we can actually change the world in a short period of time? How do we conceive of the possibility that we can achieve some sort of control over the negative effects of climate change?
It's easy to point at technology and say, well, look at the way technology came in there. It's easy to talk about finance and foreign investment. Look at the way that that came in there. It's easy to talk about the way in which the Chinese developed an environment within which this transformation could take place. But I think the real triumph of that transformation was imagination.
One reason we have made this a 2050 event is because it gives us the freedom to make any speculations that are possible, and most of us won't be around at that point to be proved wrong or right.
If you're not familiar with our agency, we are the premier provider of geospatial intelligence, think geography, to the United States government and our allies. Geospatial intelligence is a discipline that's focused on the exploitation and the analysis of geospatial data and information. We describe, we assess, and we visually depict physical features, natural and constructed, and geographically referenced activities on the Earth. Put another way, it's your passion, it's your profession that will lead to a brighter future.
What I want to add is consumers are the ones who hold the key for the future, sustainable future in transportation. But ultimately, I think these three innovations, the first one is really driven by policy, second one is driven by consumers, the third one is driven by the industry.
I hope you will remember this day the rest of your life, all right? Because the biggest person in the room is going to talk about nano energy, all right? The so what to this happens to be that we're reaching a stage now where something the size of a postage stamp can run a remote sensor. Something the size of 6 or 8 of these postage stamps can run a cell phone. Something the size of 800 or 900 of them can do a kilowatt of energy and perhaps perform a function in space without solar panels or a battery. And a cubic meter of these will run a neighborhood, or an off-grid industrial complex, or a high-rise, or Columbia University's campus. For me, that's game-changing. This little guy performed for 3.7 years. So it continues to keep on giving when there's a load applied.
So when I think about the world today and how we need to transform, we need to peel away those scotomas and see things that we haven't seen before. Failure to see what's before our very eyes. So I would just close by saying that GIS has the ability to provide huge understanding of the world around us so that we can attack these problems. And the idea of a scotoma is let's think differently about GIS. Let's peel away this thing so that GIS can liberate us to be able to solve the world's problems today.
The work that you all are doing becomes even more important. It becomes even more important that we make sure the public understands what the real science is on this, what the facts are. It becomes more important that we identify and out the climate denial apparatus that the fossil fuel industry maintains. It becomes more and more important that we call on our friends in the corporate sector, companies like Apple and Google and Microsoft and Facebook, companies like Goldman Sachs and Bank of America and BlackRock, companies like Coca-Cola and Pepsi, who all have good climate policies and are interested in sustainability, that we call on them to show up in Congress, which they're really not doing right now, and lean in, particularly now that we have a Democratic House of Representatives, to help support Republicans to come on board and understand that this is a real matter of urgency and national security. The last thing that I will say is that it is also important for us to understand that despite what the big oil CEOs are saying about recognizing that climate change is real and recognizing that their product is causing climate change and saying that they support a price on carbon, what we see in Congress from the ground is that the political operation that those CEOs pay for and run is still 100% dead set against the policy that the CEOs claim to support. You saw a little window on that with the heavy big oil spending against the carbon price out in Washington state in this past election. And I see it every day in Congress, where the groups that are supported by the fossil fuel industry, including the companies whose CEOs claim to take this seriously, are still 100% politically dedicated to preventing any action on climate change. These companies ought not to be allowed to get away with that divergence between what they say and what they actually do. And that's a place where we can all provide a little bit of added pressure.
When my students ask me, what can I do as a single individual? I say, if all of you could just do what you can do, collectively we'll make a difference, Senator.
We need a narrative, we need the imagination that the world can work together the way that it did in China. The world can identify pathways to invest hundreds of billions and then trillions of dollars. We can do that, but we need the story, we need the imagination, we need the explanation that crystallizes it all. And that's what I'd just like to leave you with. Where's that narrative going to come from, and how do we create the imagination that we can do this? China has done it in a place. We now need to do it in a system.